Now, I have, for these two lectures that I'm going to give, I have announced two topics. One topic is, who is Jesus Christ for us today? And the other one is, why did God create the world? Now, I'm going to invert these topics, and I'm going to first speak about, well, the one that I said first this evening, who is Jesus Christ for us today, and then we'll move to the other one. Now, these seem to be, and are, very theological topics, but in many ways they're the topics that define who we are and how we are to live in this world. Now, these are not quite the political questions. They're pre-political questions, but every politics worthy of its name ought to take them into account and ought to be based on them. I find it especially important at a time when politics is caught in a stalemate often in various countries between left and right that cannot in any way get together and rule in common. I find especially important for us to step back and ask the big question of what should inform the politics as we experience it. So, my first question then is, who is Jesus Christ for us today? Sitting in a Nazi prison not long before he was murdered toward the end of World War II, Dietrich Bonhoeffer asked what he considered to be the critical question of his time. And that question is the title of my lecture, Who is Jesus Christ for us today? He added a word in there that's missing from my quote. Who is Jesus Christ actually for us today? I believe that we today, communities of faith all around the globe, we need to ask that question with renewed urgency and with renewed vigor. Now, some of you know that this year was a special year for thinking about Jesus Christ because it is 17th century since the Nicene Creed has been promulgated. Nicene Creed, which defines who Jesus Christ is for us in a profound and, in many places, very beautiful way. Jesus Christ is light from light. God from God. True God from true God. This is who Jesus Christ is for us. This is the core identity of who he is. Which is to say that this Jewish rabbi, who at the beginning of our era was walking on the streets of Palestine, who taught, who suffered, and who died, who resurrected and who ascended, he is the God from God. And he is therefore, we can say the same as the Epistle of Hebrews said, for us today, as he was yesterday, and as he will be in the future. So, identity of Jesus Christ, who is Jesus Christ for us today, that seemed to be settled. This is the one, right? It almost seems like we don't have to ask this question. And yet we must ask afresh this question. Who is Jesus Christ in every age, in every place? And so the question is, who is Jesus Christ for us? For you? For me? In different settings in which we find ourselves. And then more pointedly, as I mentioned earlier, who is he not simply in our imagination? Who is he not simply in traditions that we have received, but who is he for us actually in the lives that we live? That question, I think, is a central Christian question that needs to be answered by each one of us. I'll return to some of the answers and how they bear on how we think about ourselves in the world today. But let me first say a few words about our today. And I don't mean to engage into large social or even global analysis. I think sometimes when we think about the world, we have to take almost like something like orbital view. There's a book that by Samantha Harvey, written in English. It's a short book, some 170 pages, and it's called Orbital. And basically it describes, I think, 7 astronauts. I think it's 7, 6, 7, something like that. Astronauts in the space station who are observing the Earth and orbiting around the Earth and observing kind of globality of the Earth. And in some ways, you don't get a sense of who we are until you step back and see us spinning in the universe. But I won't go that far. I will try to just sketch very briefly what I think is a kind of relevant aspect of the character of our world. And then I'll ask the question, who is Jesus Christ in a broader culture today? So first, this character of the world. And I'll be very short, but I'll say this. We are, I think, in a grip of what I like to describe as epochal change. That is to say, a momentous transformation of the world in which we live. And perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps it is comparable to the Industrial Revolution that has changed the face of the planet. Or perhaps it's even comparable to Neolithic revolution that has profoundly formed the world as we see it today. But if we are in this kind of a change, I would put it in this way, that one form of the world is dying, and another form of the world is being born. And the pains of simultaneous dying and being born are in some places reaching almost apocalyptic intensity. It's no accident that we live today in what people describe as dystopian times when we don't know exactly how we can properly hope. We are caught in this whirlwind of change, and some are looking hopelessly into impending doom. Others dream of transhuman, godlike existence, perhaps somewhere on Mars, like Elon Musk is trying to figure out how to make that happen. But from where will we draw values in that world that is coming and that we don't know yet how it will look? What will help us steer the course? Or we can put it this way, how do we know where to point the arrow of our longing as human beings so that we live in the world that is worthy of our humanity, worthy of the world that God has created? So that's the kind of situation. Each one of us then lives also in particular local situations. Those local situations are important, but we share this epochal change. And now let's look at the place of Jesus Christ in the world today. The way he's perceived by many in the midst of this epochal whirlwind. So when Nicene Creed describes Jesus Christ as the God who has become human, it gives highest possible authority to his life and to his teaching. He, that is to say, his concrete life is the light that shines, That's what the Gospel of John says at the very beginning, that life is the light. So Jesus embodied, he proclaimed, he enacted a new and unique vision of life. What is at the heart of his proclamation, of this new way of life? It is the trust in and wholehearted love for the God of unconditional love. Consequently, the practice of this kind of love is the way of life that he stood for, he proclaimed. And it should regulate all the other goods that we consider to be good. They should be judged in the light of that whole-souled devotion to God and the love of neighbor. Now, Christians in the first centuries and through the whole history of Christian East and West, they embraced Jesus Christ as what one can say a moral exemplar. He was how human beings should behave if they behave rightly. Most people admired him as such an ideal. Most people also admired his devoted followers. Think about St. Francis. People admired him as a saint. Everybody did. They knew that each one of them would not be able to reach that ideal. They knew also that they could probably not govern the world by following that ideal, but that nonetheless was how a proper human being should live. He was the measure, Jesus Christ was the measure of our humanity. Now, it's interestingly enough, he became that measure of humanity even to the most of the modernity up to maybe 50s of the last century. He remained as an embodiment of noblest ideals. But I want to suggest, and maybe you'll be surprised to hear that from a theologian, I want to suggest that the reputation of Jesus Christ in the world today has plummeted. It used to be possible, my doctoral supervisor and very famous Catholic theologians, they wrote the book titled Church No, Jesus Yes. That was the title of the book. Now, that was supposed to endear that book to the larger audience because people were kind of troubled about the church, but they were kind of excited about Jesus Christ. I don't think that in America this title would fly because people are not attracted particularly to who Jesus Christ is. I have a phrase for that, and that is that Jesus Christ has become a moral stranger to us. And moral stranger, by the way, not just to so-called world, but moral stranger to us who sit in the church. I wasn't planning to say that, but I'll tell you, first time I came to that realization, I was teaching a class on Jesus Christ and being human, flourishing. And so what we did in this class, we taught life of Christ, and then life of Christ is the stages of life that each one of us lives. So we talk about the birth. And then how do we understand birth of a new human into the world? Then education, because after a child comes into the world, then you want to educate the child. And then we read these passages how disciples were bringing their children to, parents were bringing their children to Jesus, and disciples were grumbling a little bit about it, but Jesus wanted to be with little children. And as it turned out, both my co-teacher and I had just become parents. I had a maybe 2-year-old daughter or a year-old daughter. He had also a 3-year-old daughter. And I don't know which one of us asked that question. But we ask the question like this. Remember, I'm a total Jesus freak, right? I'm for Jesus. We ask the question, would we let Jesus raise our daughters? To my shame, I have to say, I'm not sure. Would he know how to do it? Would he not ruin her for future? Would he truly take care of her in a proper way? And I realize Jesus has in some ways become a moral stranger to me. I can give other examples. So we are in a situation that I would describe following. Two features of the world. Epochal and disorienting changes of global proportions. That's what's happening. And second, widespread forgetfulness of Jesus Christ and his assimilation into the dominant form of the world. He's fine as long as he helps us achieve our goals. He's fine as Savior, as in help, but he's not fine as actually the one who defines what it means to be human. So this is our predicament. We need Jesus Christ more than we ever did need him before. But the value of Jesus Christ is lesser today, or we value Jesus Christ less today than we ever did before. Now let me develop a little bit this idea of a moral stranger, and then have a set of contrasts between what we value and what Christ valued. So by moral stranger, I mean something like this. If you, in your mind now as you listen to me, if you made two lists, and one list is what you think is important in your life. No, not what you think, but how you act in terms of that determines what you actually think is important. With what do you spend most of your time? What makes you angry the most? What makes you excited the most? Questions like that. And then put the list of things in order. And then read your Gospels in your mind as I speak. And then list things how they are important to Jesus Christ. Take a second. Now, I don't know about you, but when I make that list, there's overlap. No question about it, except that it's not very great. Except there's so many things where there are kind of discrepancies. Discrepancies in emphasis, discrepancies in actually what I value. Some of the deeply important things to us were unimportant to him. I'll give you one example. I spend a little bit of time shopping and buying a suit, making sure that I have a pocket square that fits with my shirt, and if I don't have pocket square, that I have a tie. The whole thing. And when I go out, before I go out, even though I have no hair, I still look at myself in the mirror and make sure that I kind of look presentable. But have you noticed that we have nothing in the Gospels about how Jesus looked? Zilch. Absolutely nothing. We have no idea how he looked. We have no idea how he dressed properly. Why is that? That for the first disciples, looks of the most important person in their lives did not matter at all. What method then? That's the question. Okay, let me give you some other examples, and then we'll go from a few of those. Let's take the phenomenon that's very important now, these days, in our experiences with internet in particular. And that is what's called attention economy. I mentioned that the other night as well. It's a kind of dominant force today. That is to say, our attention companies seek to capture our attention, and when they capture our attention, they seek then to translate that attention into some kind of information about us or monetary benefit for them. A best case scenario, both of these things. And some people actually think about this as mind fracking. That is to say, extracting what they can from our minds to translate that into monetary gain. So, if we are wise, we'd be very careful with attention economy. And it's very hard, on the other hand, to get yourself kind of freed from that, because you get something for free so that your mind can be fracked. Namely, you get free access to all sorts of information. I get news from BBC. I track the going down with the flip my phone, and obviously my mind is being fracked all the time as I'm doing this, right? So there's a kind of exchange that's going on. But I don't want to go now too much into attention economy of this sort. I want to turn our attention to something else, an aspect of this attention economy, which is to say that each one of us, is engaged in an actor in this attention economy. We like to get the attention. Think of social media. We like to have the attention, to have those likes, and we get those likes. Suddenly, dopamine kicks in, we feel fantastic, right? And then when that attention is not given to us, we feel that we are kind of losers, right? So that we live from the likes of anonymous others, and we let our self-image be defined by how they perceive us. How many likes I have, or how many likes I do not have. And very much our lives are revolving like that, around that. And so basically we are attuned to what kind of life we have in imagination of others. And when they don't like the life that we lead, we get to be downcast because we are not thought as valuable. If they don't see us, we experience ourselves as nobodies. And yet, precisely this search for recognition of anonymous others turns us into nobodies, because we are nobodies in ourselves, but we're somebody only when we have a life in the eyes of the other people. Now, contrast Jesus with that. Jesus shies away from fame. He does not want fame. As it turns out, when he starts his ministry, he is rather famous. Then these lights are hitting very... Oh, am I taking something that I shouldn't be taking off? Let's see whether I'm going to succeed without... There we go. Thank you so much. When he starts his ministry, immediately he's pushed into limelight. People are attracted to him, he's healing. And now you would think if Jesus was us, he's like, this is very cool. Now I've got to kind of build this following very, very carefully, right? And yet he doesn't. They're seeking him. He goes away, not to be found by them. Goes to speak elsewhere. He's not interested in amassing fame. And why is he not interested in that? Because he knows that they are going to dare, if he lets himself define by them, he will lose the very heart of why he came to them. The ministry would be ruined because his own person would be distorted. As a matter of fact, in Gospel of John, we read when Jesus says to people who are looking for him, "You seek for me because you've ate the bread with which I fed you. You don't seek me because of me. You don't seek me because of the heart of my message. You seek me because of you. You want you, and therefore I matter to you." His sense does not derive from the opinion of others. And you have at the very beginning of his ministry, he's being baptized, and then there's a voice from heaven that says, "This is my beloved Son. In him I'm well pleased." That name is at the same time his mission. That is his identity. Not the opinion, bad or good, of anybody who is around him. So that's the first thing. Attention economy, something that we, especially younger generation, experience every day. First, I want to make a contrast between instrumental value and intrinsic value of things. Now, things, whether animate or inanimate, have for us lost largely their intrinsic value. By intrinsic value, I mean this: they're valuable in and of themselves. Even if we didn't need them, they would still be valuable. That's what the child is, right? Child is valuable irrespective of what the child does to a parent. Indeed, if the parent loves the child just for the thing that the child does for them, this is a very good way to spoil a very good creature of God, right? So, but in many domains, we have lost the sense of intrinsic value. Put slightly differently, we love them the way we love flourless chocolate cake. The whole sole purpose of a flourless chocolate cake is for me to devour it, for me to use it, right? That's why I appreciate it. In other words, we love things because they satisfy our craving. Oops. Okay, I'm okay still? Yeah. Sure, very often we do appreciate others for many qualities, for many things that they do, especially if we collaborate with somebody. But if you step back and you ask, it's also something that we seek to redound to us. Our relations to things and people is largely instrumental. According to the teaching of Jesus, God feeds the grass of the clothes, the grass of the field, and feeds the ravens, who doesn't seem to add any of the divine pleasure up in heaven. He feeds them, he clothes them, just because he values them. A little lily is more beautiful than Solomon was in all of his kingly glory. God clothed it. For why? In order to make it beautiful, because it mattered to him. We're told also that God has counted every hair of our head. It's a hyperbole, but nonetheless, I find a little bit insulted by how God has treated me as opposed to, say, Mark Carpenter. But again, you can see here this emphasis on the intrinsic value of our lives. Let's take a next example. I have written the book, some of you have seen it, called about striving for superiority, and we can contrast that with the practice of humility. Now, we have organized our entire life. I mean, our societies are organized in such a way that in our entire life, we are seeking superiority, which is to say, we're seeking to be better than others, because when we are better than others, then we are succeeding. This is so in education. This is so in economy. This is so in politics. This is so in arts. And this is certainly so in sports. Some of you might think, well, in sports, you have to be that and do that. I'm not so sure that that's the case. I don't want to give you lessons in sports, especially not Brazilians. You guys are amazing in many things, but certainly in sports. So there's a story of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. Some of you it's not quite before your generation. You're familiar with these figures in basketball, right? They were actually very close friends, highly competitive, and very close. Rejoiced when each other beat the other. They were buddies. Contrast that to Messi and Ronaldo, right? I mean, they hate each other's guts, right? And competition is everything. I must be better than he because I draw my value from being better than he, and if he's lesser, I'm the more important one. So often, striving for superiority improves performance. But the cost is often very high. Superiority is always only temporary. Every position that you have is contested. And so what happens, we oscillate between elation, if we are up, and self-loathing if we are down. We are dejected if somebody is better than us, and we are excited, terribly excited if we are better than them. Or ordinary value of things, which we value, gets lost. I give an example of a car that I drive. I drive a Honda Fit, nice little Honda that I really love. But just imagine my neighbor gets and parks next to me an Audi or BMW or something like that, and it's electric on top of it, then I think, oh, my fantastic little car has shrunk and shriveled to being nothing, right? I cannot value anymore my car because why? Because my neighbor has a better car? If that is not insanity, I don't know what is. How can my car have lost value by the mere fact of my neighbor having bought a car that is more expensive than mine? It hasn't lost any value. I should be as happy with my car as I was before. You see how ordinary things lose value and constantly lose value. And we are in a rat race so that we ourselves are too tired in life, and so that also that has a tremendously negative effects upon our environment. Next example. Fear of the poor versus care for the poor. You know, we pretty much know what it takes to overcome poverty. We have evidence-based ways out of poverty, and yet we mostly sit on our hands and do nothing. For the most part, now I'm talking not about Brazil, I'm talking about the United States. For the most part, upper and middle upper classes, middle classes, even lower middle classes, have no interest in helping the poor and are uncomfortable being around them. We want them out of our world. We are convinced deep down in our souls that they reflect badly on us and diminish value of our neighborhoods. We don't want to give them anything. Because why? We live in performance societies, which is to say we live in societies in which you are judged by the performance that you achieve, right? So we're back to the striving for superiority. And whatever I give to others, I don't have. That diminishes me in this crazy calculus that we have made to be our own. That's why we don't want to support them and consider them as a dream, as a drain on our resources. As a book that I like very much, Adela Cortina has published it, and it's called Aporophobia, which means fear of the poor. She introduced this concept as a kind of alternative to xenophobia, fear of the stranger, of the foreigner. And she observes in many of the European countries and in the United States how actually we are not xenophobic when it comes to the rich strangers. We're only xenophobic when it comes to the poor strangers. And why would that be the case? Because they bring something to our countries, rather than taking something, we think, taking something away from us. Now consider, in contrast, Jesus. Even though God's care is universal, God's care for the poor is particular. I think it's true to say that the poor are God's special love. The poor are God's first love. Now, you'd see that I'm talking about liberation theologians here, right? And actually, you know who I'm quoting? Pope Benedict XVI, a big enemy of liberation theologians. You can say whatever you want, but Jesus and the poor, they're tight like this. You can't ply this apart. You have to be pretty ideologically twisted, pardon my expression, to want to somehow make Jesus indifferent to the poor and treating every person and caring for every person equally. It's just not true in the gospel. Judgments of history is passed on how we relate to the poor. So next, our third sentence, and his love of enemies. Now, today the world is in a grip of aggressive nationalisms, each underwritten by a fierce deity bent on increasing tribal or national power, expanding its reach, achieving again superiority over others. Strangers, especially destitute ones, are oppressed. They're hunted down, driven out. They're not allowed in because they would sully, we say, the national purity. Just recently, today, the news. Only 7,500 refugees are going to be admitted to United States. And those who are admitted are white Afrikaners. Jesus preached and enacted God's unconditional love. Sometimes people say, oh, Jesus was about love. Jesus wasn't just about any love. There's so many different loves that it says nothing to simply say Jesus was about love. I love chocolate cake, right, as I mentioned earlier, right? And don't care particularly for it except to make it and then to have it disappear. But unconditional love, not just for those who belong to our group, but those who don't. Love not just for those we consider to be good and therefore worthy of love, but also who we consider to be evil and therefore we believe that they deserve hate. Love not just for friends, but for enemies as well. Jesus taught that God makes His sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. It's this image of the sun that expresses God's unconditional love, God's pure and unlimited love. Some of you know that I'm a big fan of Nietzsche. Some of you might be surprised by that because he was one of the nastiest atheists that ever lived. And if you read his book Antichrist, he is not quite a friend of Christians, to put it very, very mildly. But he's got this beautiful image that he builds on this idea that God lets the sun shine on good and on the evil. And he says he's kind of imagining a scene where the sun is falling down, the evening is coming, and then fishermen are rowing into their harbor, right? And then he says that sun in the evening hours makes even the poorest fishermen row with golden oars. It's a beautiful image, right? The sun does that, right? And without any regard to the value and the worth of a person. It's amazing. Finally, of the list, primacy of our own happiness versus primacy of God and of neighbor. Today, the so-called identitarians of the hard right, for them, there's a primacy of native soil. There's a primacy of family-built ties. There's a primacy of our own well-being. And Jesus, in many ways, appends this. There's this hard saying of Jesus, if you don't hate your brother, your mother and father, you are not worthy of me. Now, granted, this hatred is a hyperbole. He doesn't mean you should hate them. You should subordinate your love for that which is closest to you. Indeed, you should subordinate your love to yourself, to your love for God. Now, that is a challenging teaching. It turns out that the God to which you subordinate your most dearest loves is the God who loves you and that which you have subordinated to Him. We can't quite avoid the scandal of Abraham. Abraham, who is asked to sacrifice his son. I think we all are called to sacrifice what is dearest for us so that it would be returned to us in a deeper and a better way. So, of these, 6 things that I have mentioned, one could make a list of about 30, right? So of things how Jesus compares to the things that we value and we do. These 6 things sometimes feel to us as if they make Jesus into, what's the good word for it? Wuss. Somebody who is not particularly strong and sturdy, mild and kind Jesus, but not the kind of sturdy and the strong one, feminine so-called Jesus, right, rather than a masculine one, as some people would like to put it. There is a very fierce and warlike saying in the middle of the Gospel of Luke. Here's how it reads. I have come to bring fire on earth, and how I wish that it were already kindled. Do you think that I have come to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. Now, the Greek original, Marcelov is going to test me whether I'm right about this. He's a resident expert in Greek. I mean, the Greek English translation said, I have come to bring fire on earth. The Greek said, fire I have come to bring to earth. It puts fire right there on the very beginning. It's emphasized. Now, that kind of verse fits into our aggressive, polarized societies. Friends and families and institutions are deeply divided, unable to relate without acrimony, without calling each other names, even without violence. Fire, extremists amongst us urge, is needed to swallow our enemies. I was going to give you another example from our esteemed president in the United States, but I think one was enough. You had your own. So Jesus seems to offer, right, just what the extremists want, right? Except that the fire he came to bring is the fire of his unconditional love. Next verse, which I haven't read, the verse immediately after fire I've come to bring, reads, I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what constraint I am under until it is completed. The fire, just like the baptism, has to do with love. Baptism is a baptism of his crucifixion, where he dies for the sins of the world. And fire is the fire which comes when the disciples are gathered, waiting for Jesus' promise after he has been taken from them into heaven. But what about divisions of family? It's interesting how Jesus' commitment to Jesus divides. It doesn't divide because it demonizes the other. It divides because it is unconditional love. That is the scandalous in Jesus. And that is so incredibly sturdy and powerful in Jesus. Try practicing it consistently, and you'll see what kind of muscles it takes in order to be there for others when then others need us. God from God, true God from true God, light from light. That's who Jesus Christ is. That's who this scandalous Jesus Christ is. Now, it's uncomfortable, Jesus. But remember, this epochal change in which we find ourselves. Have our values, which have displaced Jesus Christ, served us well in the world that we now inhabit? The world that teeters at the point, I think, of destruction in many ways. We are facing a crisis. There is no point in us trying to persuade ourselves otherwise. Somehow, things are going to work out. I think we are called to radically change our stance, our values. And maybe at some point, it's these values that will shine the light again and create a world that is more in line with that God who from God has come down to us is and how he lived. I speak this and I'm scared from my own words. But I speak the words of which I'm scared because I think they're true. And I think we ought to pray for the courage to be the disciples of the crucified Christ and find our freedom in him. Thank you very much.